Welcome back to the Stop the Violence podcast. So today's episode, of course, is about Black Lives Matter. Now on this podcast, I usually say a couple of intro topics and talk about them somewhat briefly, and then I get into a topic. So if I was doing it that way, today I would talk about, obviously, of course, the verdict of the Derek Chauvin trial, as well as the recent killing of Bryant. But I'm actually going to be spending a good amount of time going into depth about each of these topics and talking about Black Lives Matter more in depth. I'm also going to talk about how the Black Lives Matter movement and the animal rights movement are very similar. There's a lot of similarities. I'm going to go into that after I talk about those other topics, but just as kind of a pre-summary, the points I'm making are that Black Lives Matter and animal rights are both movements that are just founded on the very simple concept and idea that unnecessary violence is wrong. And with the simple goal of doing what we can to speak out against it and to stop it. And it might be surprising, but I'm also going to get into how the responses to the BLM movement and even to activists is quite similar to the responses to the animal rights movement and to animal rights activists. So, oh my gosh, the Derek Chauvin trial. I am so happy that the jury watched the video and just made their decision based on the truth that they saw there right in front of their eyes. I am so glad to see accountability for Derek Chauvin. It's not justice. Justice would be George Floyd still alive. Well, it's been a really beautiful thing to see this. However, right as we were getting this verdict announced, we learned about the shooting and killing of a 16-year-old girl. They were reporting 15 at first, but I believe she was 16, named Bryant. But before I get to that, I'm just going to talk about the whole George Floyd thing in general in the trial. So last year in May, George Floyd was murdered in broad daylight in front of a child and other onlookers. So let's get into what happened. George Floyd was at Cup Foods, which is like a convenience gas station type of store, and he gave a counterfeit $20 bill to the people, and there's video footage of him from the security hugging a woman and, totally being non-threatening. Yes, hi, and the cash register worker or whoever said that he was high. But he was not being violent, he was not being harmful, and he did give a counterfeit bill, so the police were called because of that. But obviously the events that happened after that were really overboard. So some police obviously came to the scene, and unfortunately one of them was Derek Chauvin, and the other ones who were with him also, unfortunately, those were the people who... There's body cam footage of George Floyd in the driver's seat of his car and a cop going up to the car, just immediately pointing a gun at him. Like, immediately. So for one thing, that is so excessive. And yes, George Floyd was high, but he also was clearly exhibiting signs of, I would say, PTSD. The woman who he was around or something was saying in one of the videos that he had been shot before and he doesn't do well with, having a gun pointed at them. I've never had a gun pointed at me in my life. I would not fucking respond well at all if that happened to me. And when I think about the times in my life back before I went, more straight edge, so to speak, that I've been high on, marijuana, I know that my anxiety can get really heightened when I was high. And I don't know what it's like to be on the drugs he was on, but I can't imagine it was easy. And so here's the thing, before I even tell the rest of what happened, there's this there's a program in Denver, Colorado, and I heard about this from Sean King's podcast, The Breakdown. But there's this program called STAR, and they reroute 911 calls that are about things that include like this kind of situation where a person is on drugs or under the influence of some sort of substance. It also includes homeless people, indecent exposure, and response to people having mental health issues and things like that. So situations that are not dangerous, that are not threatening anybody's safety, but still need to be addressed. So I would argue wholeheartedly that this situation with George Floyd, yes, he gave a counterfeit $20 bill, but like honestly, is that really that fucking horrible to where a police officer has to arrive? I don't think so, but whatever. I know he did that, but he was under the influence. So if a program like STAR would have answered and responded to this, they wouldn't have even had to call any police, and then he could have got some sort of citation or fine or whatever the punishment may be for doing the counterfeit bill without actually having police have to show up. Or maybe police could then show up after the people from STAR, dealt with him and got him sobered up and stuff. Then the police could have showed up and, calmly, rationally, and reasonably took him into custody or wrote, like I said, whatever fine it may be for giving someone a counterfeit $20 bill. I'm not really sure what that is, but I have no reason to believe that that couldn't have happened if we had programs like STAR all over the world. But we don't, unfortunately, at this time have programs like STAR. And I will say that STAR has not had to call any police in any of these situations. They've helped talk people down from suicide attempts. They've helped homeless people. They've helped various situations where people were on drugs or having a mental health crisis. None of it ever got violent. None of it ever escalated. None of it ever even required the police. So we're talking about situations where police are not even really required, and we put too much responsibility on police. Police are not adequately trained on how to de-escalate situations and respond in ways without using excessive force, let alone lethal force. A lot of these 911 calls that are, say, a white woman sees a black person and doing something, I don't know, and she feels like something is sketchy. In some of these incidents, the cop shows up and shoots them dead and does it like within a second. Like that little boy that was playing in the park. The cop pulls up and just shoots him instantly. It's on video. So situations like that, where someone calls just because they see someone doing something and they're like, what are they doing? Someone like STAR could show up to that. And it's really unfortunate that police end up showing up to a lot of these things. Police also are not adequately trained on how to deal with people that have mental health issues. We see it all the time with people that have something such as autism getting shot and killed because, a person with autism is not going to respond well when, say, they're touched or restrained, and then the police officers might not even know the person has autism and might shoot them dead, just as an example. And again, that would be completely prevented if a program like STAR with professionals, psychiatrists, people who know about drugs and how to get people sober, I guess you would say, they would actually know what to do in these situations. And if things got dangerous, they could call police. But like I said, as far as I know, STAR has not had to do that yet, and they've been happening for at least 6 months. So that is exactly the kind of reform and change, just one of the examples of the reforms and change that the Black Lives Matter movement is asking for. And when it's explained to an open ear that's actually listening, you can see that it's not extreme and it's really nothing but positive and logical. Like, it's just logic. So back to George Floyd being in the car, a gun is immediately pointed at him. He's high to some degree. He was walking around fine. He was talking. It's not like he was belligerent, falling over. I'm not an expert on drugs, but besides the point, a gun is just immediately pointed at him, and he's immediately in distress emotionally and scared and fearing for his life already because a gun is fucking pointing at him. And all he did was give a counterfeit $20 bill and be high. And being high and giving a counterfeit $20 bill, if a white person did that, no one would expect death to be the logical next repercussion of those behaviors. They just wouldn't. So there's security footage of George Floyd sitting handcuffed at the side of the building with police talking to him, and there's no audio. And then there's also, I believe, body cam footage of police handcuffing him, and I think he does resist at first, but nothing major. It's not like he's fighting the police or doing anything crazy. He just is resisting arrest. Did you ever watch the show Cops? How many people ran away and resisted arrest? Every fucking thing they showed on Cops was people running away and resisting arrest. People of all colors. And none of that ended up in them getting murdered for it. So I really don't understand this whole, if they don't resist arrest, or I hate this fucking drives me crazy, but play stupid games, win stupid prizes, the anthem quote for victim blamers. I'll get to victim blaming in a little while here. You know that exactly 0.0 of the people saying if they just wouldn't resist arrest, with George Floyd or with Daunte Wright or with other cases, they would not fucking be saying that shit if that was their loved one. They just simply would not. So we now have Derek Chauvin's body cam footage showing George Floyd is already handcuffed. He's sitting at the edge of the back seat of the car, and he's saying, "I'm claustrophobic." I don't know how to interpret that. Was that just him resisting? Was that him being in an anxiety attack from having a gun pointed at him earlier, a PTSD trigger? I don't know. Or was it a combination of the two? All I know is that saying I'm claustrophobic and not wanting to be in the backseat of a police car is not grounds to fucking be murdered in the street. When you're not physically harming anybody, you're not harming any cop, nothing. No one's being harmed by George Floyd. There's no video footage at any point where George Floyd is harming anybody in this incident where he is killed. But after that goes on for about a minute or two, Derek Chauvin has him, actually all of the cops, maybe 3 or 4 of them, have him on the ground face down on the pavement. And then that is when Derek Chauvin begins obviously putting his knee on his neck, and I don't know if that's before or after any resisting is happening, but I don't know why a knee was ever put on the neck. If there were 4 men there and he was already handcuffed, I don't understand why between the 4 of them they couldn't have just restrained him and put him in the back of the cop car, or even just restrained him and waited around for, I don't know, just as an idea, maybe a bigger cop car, the SUV types that have more room if he was truly claustrophobic. You could have tried that. Who knows? They could have called for backup for police who were able to restrain him and take him into a police station without fucking murdering him, since these officers clearly were not able to do that somehow. And that is where the main video comes in, of where he had his knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 26 seconds, I believe was the length of time. And at no point in that entire video while the knee is on his neck is George Floyd even physically able to resist, because he's not able to move. And he's saying, I can't breathe. He's pleading. He's saying his stomach hurts. He's saying, I'm through. They're going to kill me. He calls out for his mama. A grown man calling out for his mama. And onlookers, including a child who was 9 years old at the time, and a 17-year-old girl who filmed this, and all these other people calling him out on what he was doing, saying, you're doing a blood choke, get off of his neck. There was a firefighter EMT there who pleaded, can I check his pulse? Can I give him medical assistance? And the other officer, Officer Tao, standing there, was really rude to her. And anytime someone tried to even come near the scene, Officer Tao would get physical and threaten them physically. And all of these people have tremendous PTSD and guilt that they couldn't do more. And they all testified. Like, sending love and encouragement and positivity to these brave people for witnessing, bearing witness, and for testifying. I actually didn't watch the video last year. I saw, the image of his knee on his neck, and I heard exactly what happened, and my mom watched the video, and I didn't want to watch it. I just thought, that sounds like about too much for me to handle, but I knew it was wrong. I knew I didn't have to see it in order to march on the streets. But now that we have a guilty verdict, I actually did watch it the day of the verdict. I did watch the video for the first time. And it is every bit as horrible as everyone says. I mean, he's pleading for him to let him breathe. I can't breathe. For about 4 minutes, and then he just takes this breath, and then he's gone. And then he stays on there for so many minutes after that, just completely getting rid of any chance that he could be brought back. And then when the paramedics get there, they check his pulse, and they don't even ask the officer to get off his neck while they check his pulse. The officer doesn't even get off the neck while the paramedics are there checking his pulse. He just stays on there for no reason. It's unbelievable. It is one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life, and I felt so sick to my stomach, and I couldn't get the images out of my mind. I couldn't sleep that night. It's fucking horrible. And then the paramedics just drag him. They don't even give him human decency or dignity when they're getting him on the stretcher. It's like, wow. The paramedic testified that he didn't feel a pulse. And I'm wondering, why didn't we ask this man, hey, paramedic dude, why didn't you tell Officer Shavin to get off his neck? Why did you let him stay on his neck while you were checking his pulse? That's what I want to know. But nonetheless, it is important and good that he did testify that, he didn't find a pulse at that moment in time, and that he believed him to be dead at that moment in time, because that was important for the trial, of course. Did you know that in this trial, the defense had the audacity to say that George Floyd died from this, check out this list of things: heart disease, carbon monoxide from the tailpipe exhaust, the drugs he was on, overdosing. They said his death was just simply him overdosing. They even used him recently getting off of COVID as an example. That's actually coming from my mom. I don't know if that's true or not, but I wouldn't doubt it. The defense did just such a horrible job. I just want to applaud the defense for doing such a horrible job, for saying just dumb shit like that his heart disease caused this death, and that his heart being too large caused his death. And then there's that famous line in the prosecution's closing statement: it's not because George Floyd's heart was too large, it's because Derek Chauvin's heart was too small. Brilliant. So luckily the jury found, well, it's not even luck, it's just they watched the video and they listened to the truth and they saw it before their own eyes. The jury found Derek Chauvin guilty of all 3 charges, which fucking obvious. I I had no doubts because this is such a slam dunk case. And you know why also I had no doubts? Because of the activism that was going on all over the world last summer. I just want to talk about why activism works and why all the marches, all of us who took to the streets last year for George Floyd and for all of the wrongful killings of Black people and all of the unnecessary violence of police brutality, that works. You saw how big this movement got. And now this is part of, and of course we want a lot more to be done, but this is a part of why this worked, because I'm going to tell you why. If it weren't for, first of all, the brave 17-year-old girl filming this murder and staying and filming the whole thing, and if it also weren't for just, us coming together as a people and caring and being outraged and saying this is not acceptable, this is not okay, I don't know if we would have even seen a trial, if we would have even seen anything close to a good, competent prosecution. And certainly if we would have seen a guilty verdict, because we've seen it with Rodney King, no guilty verdict. We've seen it with many cases where police get away with this. And let me read you the initial report that actually came out recently during the trial of what the police described as what happened. And I want you to think about the video if you've watched it, or everything I've just described, and compare it to what the police tried to pass off as what happened. Listen to this bullshit. So it says, man dies after medical incident during police interaction. Notice the euphemism, interaction. May 25th, 2020. On Monday evening, shortly after 8 p.m., officers from the Minneapolis Police Department responded to the 3700 block of Chicago Avenue South on a report of forgery in progress. Officers were advised that the suspect was sitting on top of a blue car and appeared to be under the influence. 2 officers arrived and located the suspect, a male believed to be in his 40s, in his car. He was ordered to step from his car. After he got out, he physically resisted officers. Officers were able to get the suspect into handcuffs and noted he appeared to be suffering medical distress. Officers called for an ambulance. He was transported to the Hennepin County Medical Center by ambulance, where he died a short time later. At no time were weapons or any type used by anyone involved in this incident. And then it says no officers were injured in the incident. Body cameras were worn. Wow. Do you see the euphemisms and just the pure lies that made it sound like they were just trying to put him in handcuffs, and then he had a medical incident, and the good guy cops they just called the ambulance, but he died later. At no point is it mentioned that Shavin puts a knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 26 seconds. So think whatever is out there that brave 17-year-old girl filmed the truth of what happened. Thank goodness. And thank goodness all of these people cared enough to march and bring light to this and share that video. If not for that, who knows? Like I said, who knows? We wouldn't have had such a really awesome prosecution that we did, probably, if it weren't for the activism, if it weren't for the video. The nation might not even know about this at all, just like so many of the other things that are lied about by police and flown under the radar, and the truth just being just thrown out the window and covered up with euphemisms. And people want to talk about George Floyd's criminal history. So this is just a classic thing. When you have a victim, people are going to victim blame them when responding to these movements. And what their motivations are, you can speculate on them. Is it purely because they're racist? Is it purely because they're having an adverse reaction to the truth? It's very interesting. George Floyd's criminal history doesn't matter, because he was high and he gave a counterfeit bill, and that's not a reason to be killed. And that's the end of the story, and his criminal history doesn't matter. And by the way, he didn't murder someone. Derek Chauvin did. It doesn't matter in that moment what he may have done in the past. Why do black people have to be these outstanding citizens and these perfectly good people who've never done anything wrong in their past in order to deserve to not be killed by police? And when you take Breonna Taylor, you can see people like Candace Owens just slandering her character, telling complete lies about who she was. Christina Mayoni, a YouTuber, has a really good YouTube video debunking these lies. Victim blaming at its finest. We saw it with Daunte Wright. I won't get too much into Daunte Wright's case because I talked about it on the previous episode, but Daunte Wright was pulled over for having air fresheners hanging from his car, and the police said that they saw that he had a warrant out for his arrest. I believe the warrant for his arrest was because he didn't show up to a court date that was sent to the wrong address, so that wasn't even his fault. That's what I've seen online, at least. But anyway, I'll just briefly explain it, but he was pulled over and the officer demanded that he get out of the car without really giving him a reason why. And he got out of the car. They kept the driver's seat door open. He began to handcuff him, and one of the officers can be heard in the video saying, stop that, although I can't see what it is that he's doing that he should apparently stop, but whatever, maybe he was just stiffening up. But either way, then the Kim Potter intervened and touched him, and then there's a scuffle, and he gets in the car, and then once he's in the car, he sits there, and the door's still open, and he's just sitting there for a full 5 seconds. And then Kim Potter is like, I'll tase you, with her gun in her hand, not her taser, which is on the opposite side of the belt, is a different color, and does not weigh the same, and she's a 26-year veteran, so she should know the difference, and she shouldn't make a mistake like this. And then she shot him in the chest. And all he was doing was sitting there in his car. If he's sitting there in his car, he's not harming any officer. He's unarmed. He's not threatening anybody's life. He's just sitting in a car. The worst he would have done is drive away, and they could have let him drive away, and they could have pursued him another way. I mean, it's not like this is some violent person who's going around killing people that you have to stop right now. The only reason she felt a need to use force, and a taser is excessive force, especially for this situation where the person's not harming, is because of her own ego. And look where it got her. He was sitting in a car. They could have let him drive away. They could have let him continue to sit there and talk to him further. They could have attempted again to arrest him. But after he was shot, he did drive away. I mean, if I was shot, I would probably drive away too so that they don't shoot me again, to try and increase my risk of survival. And then, he crashed his vehicle and he died, and his mother saw him bleeding out on a FaceTime call from the girl that was in the car with him. And it's a really horrible story. He was only 20 years old. And I mean, seriously, it shouldn't have to be explained that being pulled over for having air fresheners hanging and for having a warrant out for your arrest because you missed a court date because it was sent to the wrong address, none of these things indicate, I don't know why I have to explain this, but none of these things indicate that this person was going to do anything violent or harm or threaten police in any way. And people has none of these people that are victim blaming and saying it wouldn't have happened if he didn't resist arrest. Shut the fuck up. Have you guys not seen the show Cops ever on TV? Have you not seen all of, like I said before, all of these people of every different color running away from cops? Death and murder doesn't have to be a result of someone running. People resist arrest. People run away. That's not a death sentence. That's not reason to be killed. And again, I really wish I could talk to these internet trolls or just anyone in person who's saying, it wouldn't have happened if he didn't resist arrest, and just ask them if they would say that shit if it was their loved one. Or would they say that to his mother? Would they say that to his grandmother, to his aunt, to his child? People need to apply some empathy and realize that these are human beings and just try empathy. Empathy is when you imagine yourself in another being's position and imagine what they're going through would be like. Like, people just aren't doing that when they say shit like this. You think if, say, a beautiful, wealthy white girl who resisted arrest, for whatever reason she may have resisted arrest, and got into her car and got shot, you think people would just be like, well, she shouldn't have resisted arrest? Probably not, or probably in a much smaller amount of numbers of people saying that. Then again, we also don't see very many scenarios of that happening. With Daunte Wright, if he was a bad kid or did bad things, I don't know, I haven't looked much into it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he may or may not have done. It doesn't matter how good or not good of a person he was. It doesn't matter, because we cannot allow ourselves to be murdered at traffic, like being pulled over for traffic incidents or for having a warrant out for your arrest. I've had a warrant out for my arrest. I'm pretty sure, like a bench warrant or whatever, because when I was in college, I had a court date for, because I slid into someone on a stop sign because there was ice and I had to go to court for it. And I just straight up fucking forgot to go to court because I had an exam that day and I forgot that it was the day I was supposed to go to court. And I just called them and I was like, shit, I forgot. I'm in college and I had an exam today. And then they were like, no problem, reschedule. Imagine if I had gone out driving that day and gotten pulled over, and if I was black and if they saw I had that warrant, what could have happened potentially if, not saying all police are like this, but if I was pulled over by the wrong officer. See, what I just did there, I took an example from my own life and I applied this situation to me, and I considered, like, would I have deserved to have been shot and killed if I had gotten pulled over and resisted arrest on that day? You know? It's very simple and easy to do these exercises where you imagine yourself in another person's scenario. Which is why I want people to imagine themselves in a scenario where they have been in a physical fight. I mean, even I now have officially been in a physical fight, and I'm one of the most passive conflict-avoiding people who, you know, has grown up in mostly white neighborhoods and who has a certain amount of, like, white privilege and hasn't really been physically harmed by people and hasn't been in fights, haven't been put in positions where I had to defend myself until very recently when I was assaulted. But I know my mom has. I know various members of my family have been in physical fights with people throughout their life at different ages for different reasons. I think all of us pretty much have at least one time, or if not, then we know someone very close to us who have been in physical fights, domestic violence disputes, or, you know, whatnot, or another. So I want you to try to keep that in mind as I tell you this next incident that just happened with Micaiah Bryant. So while we all wanted to celebrate, and I did celebrate, the guilty verdict of Derek Shavin, and how amazing that was, I think while that was being announced, this happened to Micaiah Bryant. So Micaiah Bryant was a 16-year-old girl who was fighting with several people, and I'm going to mostly talk based on the video. I like to, you know, until I research things more, I like to base most of what I'm saying, especially just because I have a mistrust of the news in general. If you've been listening to me, you know that about me. I don't watch the news. And with these Black Lives Matter cases, I really make my judgments based mostly off of what I see in the video footage, which is why videoing incidents is so important and why body cam footage is so important. But anyway, They're saying that she had a knife and that she was fighting with people, and in the video it looks like there's, I don't know, 4 or 5 people involved in this fight. It's kind of hard to make out what's going on, but she did indeed have a knife, and it was in a front lawn at a house, and it might have even been her house. I'm not sure. I don't know who the other people involved in the fight were, or who the other onlookers were. I've heard that she had a bunch of people like attacking her, and that she was the one who called the police. I'm not going to report that as fact because I'm not 100% sure. So I'm just going to go off of the video, okay? So it's the body cam footage of the officer who shot and killed her. And what I can see for just a few seconds in the beginning of the video is several people fighting. There's a man kicking a woman who's down on the ground, and then there's these 2 women who are kind of like chasing each other, fighting. It kind of, to me, just looks like the classic, I hate to use this term because it's like sexist, but quote, cat fight going on, you know, where people are grabbing at shirts and chasing. And but Micaiah had a knife, and people are saying that it was in self-defense because all these people were attacking her. I don't know whether that's true or not. And then they run towards a car, the 2 women, while a man is kicking another woman who's on the ground, and she starts wielding a knife towards the other woman, and in that exact instance, when she, just right when she starts wielding the knife, the officer shoots her in the back 5 times. 5 times in the back. And I will tell you why I have a problem with this, and why I have a problem with all the comments on the videos on YouTube of the footage saying, "Good shot. The officer saved the girl from being stabbed," and all this stuff people are saying. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Just justifying and saying the cop did the right thing. Now, a disclaimer. In so many of these other incidents, like, Daunte Wright and George Floyd, among so many other examples, the black person who was murdered by police was unarmed and posing absolutely no threat to anyone's safety. So I will give it to you. In this incident, the girl does have a knife and does pose a threat to safety. So it is not exactly the same. I will make that clear. However, let me tell you something. When that piece of shit went into a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, and shot so many people dead, he was taken in without being harmed. He was arrested without being killed. When the other white man, and these are both white men, but when the other white man shot and killed, 8 people in Asian spas just recently, he was taken in and arrested without a scratch, without incident, without anything. And in this same week that happened, a man went and shot a King Soopers, which is a grocery store that I actually used to work at, side note, but he shot and killed 10 people, including a police officer, for crying out loud. And he was Syrian, but he looks quite white. Especially from far away, he appears white. You would just see him and think white man, right? He was shot in the leg, which obviously he was walking, little bloody, a little bit of a wound, but completely fine. So my fucking question is, if someone can murder 10 people, including an officer, one of your own, and you can shoot him in the leg and then take him and arrest him without any other incident, why the fuck couldn't this officer have shot Micaiah in the leg? And I'll talk about a couple of the other things he could have done, but let's just really drive this home. Like, this could be the end of the discussion. Why didn't he just shoot her in the leg? Why did it have to be in the back, and why did it have to be 5 times? It didn't. The answer is it didn't have to be in the back, and it didn't have to be 5 times. It could have been 1 time, and it didn't have to be in the back. If he shot her in the leg, she would have not been able to carry through with whatever she may have been doing with that knife. I don't know. We don't even know if she was gonna straight up like stab her to death in that moment, or if she was just wielding it. I'm not really sure. I don't know. Regardless of what her intention was, she could have been shot in the leg and that would have stopped her. That's really the end of this conversation, and why that didn't happen. You know, one could speculate if these were blue-eyed, blonde, whatever, white women fighting each other, probably would have been restrained before it even got to this point. Hello. I mean, honestly, she was a 16-year-old girl, and she had a knife, not a gun, not an assault rifle, and the shot was made from, I would say, about 20 feet away. So it's not like it was difficult to aim. And people they have the audacity to be saying good shot and cop did the right thing. Would you say that to the girl's parents, to her family? Would you say that if it happened to your loved one? Again, empathy is a very useful skill. Please learn it. They say that there was back and forth shots with the King Soopers shooter. An officer killed. And they managed to shoot him in the leg, so there is absolutely no excuse why this officer couldn't have shot Micaiah in the leg. But he also could have restrained her before it even got to this point. It's too bad that the body cam footage starts at this point. I don't know if he just pulled up and that's when it starts. I think that's what people are saying, but I'm not 100% sure. But I believe there may have been already officers there. There was adults standing around. I'm just confused, why nobody else just tried to restrain her or just they could have even restrained the other woman. Here's another thing. I actually just thought of this right now while I'm speaking, but why couldn't one of the officers just restrain the woman who didn't have the knife and just protect her from Micaiah and then point a taser at Micaiah and tase her or then restrain her? Or I don't think pointing a gun is always necessary, but I mean, pointing a gun at her with the other woman restrained and a safe distance away with no shooting happening would have obviously resulted in her not dying, so that would obviously be a better case scenario. Why an officer who is a man couldn't restrain a 15-year-old girl, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure why he couldn't have tased her at some point before this incident where they ran toward the car and she wielded the knife. I don't know. I don't know. I don't understand. I don't understand. If your training couldn't allow you to do that, I don't know what to tell you. But, at the end of the day, he could have shot her in the leg. If it really progressed to that moment where she was about to wield the knife, he could have shot her in the leg. It was only about 20 feet away. The aim was fine. Could have shot her once in the leg. She would have dropped to the ground. She certainly would have been able to follow through on whatever she was doing with the knife. Come on, people. People do not also, with these cases, take into account, they don't know what they would do in these situations. For example, I was assaulted in January. I was peacefully holding signs, and these 2 men came out and were screaming at us, and they were trying to knock a phone out of another activist's hand, and they started, hurting her. They started moving toward her and to hit her and stuff. And I didn't think about this. This was just my instinct, but I went in and started protecting her. And I didn't It's not something I thought about. It was just like instinct. You know what I mean? So people don't think like what could be going on in a person's fight or flight response during some of these incidents. You know what I mean? Like an incident where George Floyd was having a gun pointed at him. You don't know how you would react in that situation if you've never been in it, or how different people react differently. Which, of course, George Floyd didn't do anything bad or wrong. He just said, "Please don't shoot me. Please don't shoot me." And he just looked emotionally distressed. I mean, if it really was the case to where all of these people were attacking Micaiah, I don't know if that's what it was. I don't know if she was the one attacking them. I don't know. But either way, how do we know that she wasn't in a fight or flight mode? How do we know she wasn't defending herself? It's hard to say because we don't know. Again, I'm just basing it off of the video. My mom had a conversation with her coworker yesterday. She was talking about this incident. We're watching the video, and this coworker was just saying like, oh, well, just kind of justifying it. I don't know exactly what he was saying, but, it's like, oh, if she had a knife, the cop was in the right, something along those lines. And then my mom just asked him, like, have you ever been in a fight before? Like a physical fight? And he said, yeah. And she said, did you deserve to get killed by the police for it? And that made him think. It's just this whole thing of like empathy. Try it. I think a lot of people, first of all, their empathy is going down and down, lower by the day, because science shows us that the more we are spending on our phones and the more we are addicted, the less our empathy is there. And if you're one of the people that watches the news all day and you see on the news, like, especially if you have like a bias against BLM and you're watching, say, Fox News or whatever, something that's going to give you that anti-BLM narrative or standpoint, and you're just seeing like, oh, rioting and looting, and you're not looking at why protests are happening. You're not being shown the vast majority of protests which are peaceful. You're not being shown the messages and goals of the peaceful protesters and the changes that they want to make. You're just automatically going to this bias of like, BLM is bad, BLM is communist, that kind of anytime they want to say something's bad here in America, they just say it's communist, right? So if you're coming from that, then it kind of eliminates the likelihood that you are going to be open-minded and watch these videos objectively and logically assess what's going on, and you're just gonna, before even watching it, assume that the policeman is in the right. When you know damn well if you took the exact same scenario and just replaced the victim with one of your loved ones, you would not be saying the cop was in the right. You just wouldn't. It's victim blaming. And, I won't explain too much what victim blaming is because I did in my previous episode, but it's basically just saying like, she was asking for it by wearing that to a rape victim. It's like saying, they were asking to be hit by a car by walking in the crosswalk. When, in all reality, victims' only faults in so many of these situations was just being in the same vicinity as a perpetrator. Have some compassion and empathy for all of these victims, but since we're talking about it right now, for Micaiah Brown, she was 16. Do you know how much dumb shit I did when I was 16? Like, come on. Do you know how much dumb shit you did when you were 16? Just have empathy. And no, I'm not saying that wielding a knife towards someone is, just something dumb that you do. But, getting into the fight in the first place is. And you never know. Fight or flight could make you do things you wouldn't otherwise do. But regardless, even if she was planning on stabbing her to death right there in that moment, it could have been prevented by shooting her in the leg. And if that had happened, she could have reformed her life. She could have transformed her life. She could have done better. Same with George Floyd. He could have, with whatever was wrong in his past, he could have reformed himself. He could have gotten sober. He could have done better. Like, for example, Joey Carbstrong, a vegan activist, he used to be in gangs. He used to carry, I think, a knife on him. He did 6 months in prison, and he reformed his life, and now he does activism for good, for anti-violence. That could happen to anybody, but you take that opportunity and ability and chance completely away from them by taking their life, obviously. And cops need better training on how to de-escalate situations without just resorting to murder. That's it. That's all we're asking. That's, what, it's very simple what we're asking. Also, I'm sorry if at any point I've been saying Micaiah Brown, I mean Micaiah Bryant. I'm not sure if I have made that mistake. I did earlier today. So how is the Black Lives Matter movement and the animal rights veganism movement similar? As I said before, they both have the very simple message that unnecessary violence is wrong, and the same very simple goal of speaking out against unnecessary violence and wanting to stop unnecessary violence from continuing to happen moving forward. Now, I believe, of course, that we should be fighting for both movements and for all movements that are liberating any living being, human or non-human, whatever race they might be. That's called consistent anti-oppression. And if you want to learn more about that, check out Vegan Activist Alliance. But I just want to offer up that the rhetoric that they use against Black Lives Matter is very similar to the rhetoric they use against veganism. One example of this is painting out activism to be just violent and crazy and, doing more harm than good. Another example is if there is activism where property is destroyed, for example, the vandalism, graffiti, looting, or whatever in some BLM riots, and also, for example, when the Animal Liberation Front, does something illegal like sneaks into a place to rescue an animal, or, when someone like Walter Bond burned down a sheepskin factory and a couple other places, of course, making sure there was no living beings or creatures and nobody harmed in doing so. But rhetoric they use against both movements is saying that, people's property and people's inanimate objects are more important than lives, whether with BLM it's Black lives or, with veganism it's animal lives. Another rhetoric used against both movements is to slander and attack the character of activists, or with BLM, activists as well as victims. For example, we see Shaun King's character attacked. We see the woman who founded the Black Lives Matter movement, which I actually don't know her name. I don't know that much about her, but we see a lot of slandering of her character because she believes in Marxism, and things like that, which to me shouldn't really matter. It doesn't change what BLM stands for. For example, just like, Anonymous for the Voiceless, an effective vegan activist group, the founder, Paul Bashir, made some anti-transgender remarks, but that doesn't mean veganism as a movement is anti-transgender. So it just doesn't really make sense to take one person's opinion about something and then say the whole movement has that opinion. But we do see things like this a lot with both movements. We mostly, of course, see victim blaming with the BLM movement, but we do see it as well with the animal rights movement. I don't need to explain how there's victim blaming going on in BLM because I already have, but just to offer an example, Regan Russell was a vegan animal rights and human rights activist, she did both, who was attending a slaughterhouse vigil which means you just bear witness to animals before they're slaughtered and try to give them water and also document their suffering. And so she was at one of those vigils, as she always was. I do this form of activism myself. Vegans do this all over the world. But she was hit and ran over by a slaughterhouse truck while doing this, and the police actually refused to release the security footage of this happening. Her body was dragged for 100 meters and she was split in half. The driver didn't stop until a security guard screamed at him to stop, and he didn't get out of the car. His identity is totally protected, and all he got was a traffic violation. And what we saw from this, and watch the documentary There Was a Killing to learn more, and also watch the Cave Light Films film about this. I'll link them if I remember. But what we saw from this was a bunch of people. They actually showed up to where she was killed and held signs that said Regan Russell committed suicide. And they brought bacon, because it's a pig slaughterhouse, and they roasted bacon there, and they brought signs supporting truck drivers. And it's very similar to how we see with BLM people creating the stupid fucking Blue Lives Matter flag. That flag was created as a response to the BLM movement. And it's so fucking stupid because there's no such thing as a fucking blue life. But it's a similar thing of victim blaming and then violently opposing the message. I shouldn't say violently opposing in all cases, but vehemently opposing, and just saying the most callous and ignorant things, like Regan Russell committed suicide, or Daunte Wright wouldn't have been killed if he didn't resist arrest. Just horrible, awful things like that, where people are just not considering, like, if this was their loved one. Another thing we see with both Black Lives Matter and the animal rights movements are pick-me people. And I'm getting this term pick-me inspired kind of by the YouTuber David Rams. He has a video about being a pick-me vegan, and you can watch that if you want to know more of what that is. And it comes from the term pick-me girl, which you can look up on Urban Dictionary, but a pick-me girl is basically someone who will act differently around men to get the validation of men. An example of this would be a girl hanging out with a bunch of guys, and the guys are talking about, like, oh, I nailed this girl last night, and just, like, speaking in a way that's objectifying women in some manner. And then the pick-me girl is basically like, I'm not like other girls, and I'm cool, and will express, like, internalized misogyny and kind of enable and go along with the guys being misogynistic, basically. I hope I explained that right, but that's a pick-me girl, and that's where this idea comes from. So, like, a pick-me girl is compromising on kind of, you know, being a woman who respects herself and respecting other women, and allowing, like, men to walk all over you so that they will like you. It's all to be liked. And to also let guys do that to other girls and support it or go along with it or even join in. So unfortunately, with the Black Lives Matter movement, we see an occasional Black person who, dare I say, is kind of like a pick-me Black person in a way. And I don't want to, like, accuse people. I'm just going to use Candace Owens as, like, the perfect example of this. So Candace Owens is a Black woman, but she constantly is going against Black Lives Matter, and as I mentioned earlier, she slandered Breonna Taylor's character, telling a bunch of lies about her. And basically what Candace Owens does is she says things that conservative white people who are probably racist, or I would say definitely racist, want to hear, so that when they hear a Black person saying it, it gives them permission to feel and think that way, in that racist way. And then in return she's very well liked by these people who are like, yes, thank you for making me feel not bad about being a racist. Thank you for letting me feel empowered in slandering the victims of Black Lives Matter and being racist. So she is an example of someone, and I can't really say what her intentions are for certain, but I think that it's pretty clear that, you know, she has a lot of attention, she has a big following, and she has a lot of validation and praise from white people and people who are racist and people who are anti-BLM. And so it's kind of like this whole, I'm not like other Black people. I think police can murder people, like, and then white people will hear this and then they'll be like, look, a Black person's against Black Lives Matter, therefore it's not racist to be against Black Lives Matter, if that kind of makes sense. And that has a very unfortunate effect. Like Candace Owens, unfortunately, like her lies about Breonna Taylor have spread to where half of the nation believes these horrible things about Breonna Taylor, when she actually was this example of an upstanding citizen who had a college degree and who was doing a good thing in the world and was still shot and killed by police. But they even took that away from her. They tried to, by telling these lies. And then, as you might guess, a pick-me vegan is basically a vegan who says and acts like, oh, I'm not like other vegans. I won't make you watch slaughter footage. I won't ask you, is taste more valuable than life? I won't even talk about it. I won't even let you know that I'm vegan. Like, I'll just be quiet about it and I'll let you feel good about your choice to pay for violence towards animals. And then that vegan who's not like other vegans is very well liked by non-vegans and gets praise and is well liked, and it's very different from someone like me who speaks out for the animals. I get unfollowed. I've had friends not want to be friends with me anymore. People just start ignoring me and just start disliking me, and you know, of course, in some cases I've been bullied for it, and yeah, so it's hard because when you look at human psychology, we all want to be liked. We all want to be accepted. It was at one point crucial to human survival to be accepted by the tribe, you know? So from a psychology perspective, it's completely understandable why people will be, you know, quote, pick me, because, you know, they're not fully thinking about what it is that they're doing and what it is that they are condoning. You know, like Candace Owens is condoning people being against a justice movement that needs to be happening. Pick me vegans, like the example in David Ram's video was Billie Eilish saying, I don't care if you eat animals. She has 80 million followers, and she has this opportunity to tell people, hey, look what's happening to the animals, and here's why I don't pay for it and why you shouldn't pay for it, or just even look what happens to the animals. And instead she's giving people permission to pay for this violence. So this whole pick-me phenomenon has a really damaging effect for both movements. I mean, come to think of it, I could have added like the women's rights movement in this topic, because this rhetoric is also used against them. You know, the victim blaming of people who have been sexually assaulted, the pick-me girls who condone and allow misogyny in order to be liked and validated by men. Oppression is oppression, you know, and it comes from the same mindset that some lives matter more than other lives. What I've noticed from doing some just activism by myself and also just with me and my mom the last couple of days for Black Lives Matter just in our own neighborhood is that compared to last summer when everyone was doing it, people are not as, you know, loud and proud in their support of us when we're holding the signs, and people just aren't doing the activism as much. And I think a huge part of that is because the media's negative story against it that's saying, like, you know, BLM is violent, they want to make America communist, they do more harm than good, basically. It turns people away from it, and it makes it, a goal is to make you feel socially isolated for being an activist, and it makes you feel like, oh, it's better to just not rock the boat, it's better to not get involved and not say how I feel about these things. And the same thing happens with vegan activism. Activists are just painted out in such a negative way to where, everyday average people that we need in this movement, in all of these movements, look at it and go like, oh, I don't want to be like, shunned from my family. I don't want to be bullied for doing activism. It's just a lot easier if I, don't rock the boat. And it's really unfortunate. And unfortunately, when that happens, all the anti-rhetoric wins. And we have to have more courage. We have to have more courage to look deeper into the truth and to not let that win. Now, I don't have to explain this to anyone who knows me or anyone who's been listening, but I will explain this disclaimer just in case, and perhaps I should have mentioned it more toward the beginning, but that disclaimer is, when I'm comparing the Black Lives Matter movement to the animal rights movement, I'm not in any way saying that the victims are the same. Essentially, I'm not saying a black person is the same as a chicken. I would never say that. There are people in this world who believe like every animal's life is equal to a human's life, and it's kind of like your personal thing whether you believe that or whether you believe like humans have more value, but it's not really relevant because you don't have to believe that animals and humans are the same in order to like just leave animals alone and not stab them for unnecessary reasons when we don't need to eat animal products for our health, according to the American Dietetic Association, peer-reviewed science, nutritionfacts.org, etc. Essentially, the oppression is being compared and not the oppressed. And when you compare two things, you're not saying that they're the same. The act of comparing actually just means looking at the similarities and differences. I mean, I guess that's compare and contrast. But comparing is looking at two things and seeing what qualities are similar. Comparing does not mean you say two things are exactly the same in every way. So, of course, by no means is anybody saying that Black Lives Matter and veganism is exactly the same in all ways, or that we're just not. All we're saying is that it makes more logical sense. Wow. You can tell I'm getting tired. It's near the end here, but all we're saying is it makes more logical sense to be against all forms of oppression, such as against homophobia, against transphobia, against violence, against every color of every human, against unnecessary violence, whether it's done to a human or to an animal, just against all forms of oppression, rather than only being against some forms of oppression and not others. Like, for example, being against racism, but not being against homophobia and violence to the LGBT community and things like that. It doesn't make sense to only be against some of these things. And I know that animal rights is a lot further behind than these other movements because they aren't human. And it takes a little bit longer because of just how our society is at this time and how our consciousness is at this time to learn like, oh, we don't need to eat animal products. Oh, this is how bad it is what the animals go through. So, there a lot of with the animals is also just ignorance, but all of it is ignorance, right? At the end of the day, unnecessary violence and unnecessary harm is wrong. Morally wrong. It is morally wrong to stab a chicken when you can eat plant foods. It is morally wrong to shoot a black person when you could have done something else to de-escalate the situation. Or if they weren't even doing anything to harm anybody. Sexual assault is wrong, and victim blaming victims of that is wrong. Victim blaming in general is wrong, and it's not necessary. And it doesn't make logical sense. So that's all I'm saying. Thank you for listening. If you are not vegan yet, please just go binge the YouTube channel Earthling Ed. You won't even have to see any graphic footage if you do that. Just go binge Earthling Ed. Listen to the TEDx talk, Every Argument Against Veganism. I'd actually tell you to do that first, and I always have it linked in all of my stuff. Every Argument Against Veganism. And just binge Earthling Ed's YouTube channel. If you're brave, watch Dominion Movement, the documentary. There's also, Cowspiracy, Seaspiracy, What the Health, all sorts of vegan documentaries. But please, Earthling Ed has everything you need to know on, the dairy industry. They take calves, babies away from their mothers. They shoot the males in the head. They slaughter all the dairy cows. There's no such thing as humane slaughter, because humane means to show compassion and benevolence. You can't compassionately and benevolently kill someone who doesn't want to die and who doesn't have to die. We don't need animal products to live. The egg industry grinds male chicks alive because they're of no use to the industry, and all egg-laying hens are slaughtered. Fish feel pain, and trillions of them are slaughtered each year. Watch Seaspiracy. There's so much, but just watch Earthling Ed's YouTube channel. And yeah, that's it for me. Yeah, there we go. Thank you for listening. I do hope you follow the podcast and come back again and check out some of my other episodes that I have out. Peace. Bye.